third in the series of Half the Story, and today I'd like to talk about more generalized rules about when we can say half a pasuk. And I'd like to dedicate all the words of Torah on this Bet Elul to one of my greatest Rebbes, Rav Binyamin Tabory, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Rav Binyamin ben Rav Tzvi, whose yahrzeit is today, and I have to admit, amongst the many, many things that he taught me, one of the things was a beautiful shiur on Rav Soloveitchik's work on davening, and opened my eyes to the whole issue of davening, which is the topic of this podcast. So I definitely believe that he has a lot of stock in everything I ever say in davening. And even though specifically this shiur I did not hear from him, there's no question that his inspiration, and not to mention his many, many teachings, stories, and way of teaching, is something that continues to be a constant influence on my life to this very day. Let's start with the Tosfot. The Tosfot was bothered by how would we divide up the Hallel, and we say Ana Hashem Oshiana, then everyone chimes in Ana Hashem Oshiana twice, and then we say Ana Hashem Atzlichana, finishing the pasuk. And the Tosfos basically says that even though you're not supposed to stop a pasuk in the middle, here we're not stopping a pasuk in the middle, but rather we're just delaying it. Namely, two people are saying it. So rule number one, if you just delay the end of the pasuk by two people saying it, as we do in the Hallel, then it's okay. There is an assumption in the Tosfot that I just have to point out, and that is that he did not say that this doesn't apply to Ketuvim, namely to Tehillim. He could have very simply said, listen, Kol Pasuke de lo Paskinan, Moshe Ana no Paskinan, means Moshe Rabbeinu's books, the 5 books of Moses from Bereshit through Devarim, and not to the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. He assumes it applies also there, which leads us to the second answer. Indeed, comes along the Magen Avraham, it says in the name of the Kolbol, the Davka b'Torah v'Nevi'im, avar b'Ktuvim, ifshar d'sharei lechalek. Indeed, many of the examples that you see now on the chart is from the Ketuvim. If it's the example of Hallel, when we put back the Torah and we say Hallelujah Shem Hashem, Kinis Kav Shmon Levlo, and people chime in the end of the pasuk Kodu Aleretz V'Shamayim. If it's what we say on Shabbos morning, B'Yom Shvi B'Shbeach V'Amer Mizmor Shel Yom Shabbat Tov L'Hodot LaHashem, we don't finish the pasuk, and many others. From this perspective, says the Magen Avraham in the name of the Kolbo, doesn't apply to Ketuvim. It only applies to the 5 books of Moses. And indeed, he's not alone in this assertion. Comes along the Ben Ish Chai and says in a tshuva the same thing. In the Kriyat Shema Lamita, many people say psukim and they say half psukim, and he of course has the same question, and he said Ya'an sheseh pasuk shel Ketuvim ve'leita leklal zeh b'Ktuvim. Once again, it only applies to the 5 books of Moses. It doesn't apply to the Ketuvim. I should point out that the Nishmat Adam, namely Rav Avram Danzig, the author of the Chaye Adam, comes along and says that according to our Tosfot that we just quoted, that had to give a different answer why Hallel it's okay, obviously he assumes it does apply in the Ketuvim, and therefore doesn't agree with this answer. But the third answer, I believe, is the most compelling, and that is a different Magen Avraham. He says, "Umash omrim psukim betfila yesh lomar kevan dekor'im otam derech tchina uvakasha sharei." Says the Magen Avraham very simply: if you're reading psukim for the sake of psukim, you can't say half a pasuk. So if you're laning, you finish the pasuk. That's the context of the Gemara and Megillah, the laning of Rosh Chodesh. If indeed you are saying psukim for other reasons, then you have to finish the entire pasuk. If it's Kriyat Shema, we have to say 3 paragraphs of many psukim, we have to say the whole pasuk. But if you're saying Yederech Tchina Uvakasha, namely as a prayer, and you're just invoking a pasuk to strengthen your prayer, then it's fine. For example, on Rosh Hashanah, we have Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot in the Musaf. We bring 3 psukim to prove our point from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. That's Derech, Tefillah, Ubakasha. And indeed, that's exactly what the Chaye Adam, the Nishmat Adam says, that B'derech Tefillah Mutar. And one of the examples that he brings is Rosh Hashanah. Indeed, at the end of Shofarot, we say, Hashem Tzvakot Yagen Alihem, and we don't finish the pasuk. We invoke Kein Taged Lamcha Yisrael Bishlomecha, which is not a pasuk anywhere. He says because indeed we're just invoking psukim B'derech Tefillah. And therefore, he adds, it's all the more so important on Yom Hadin, where you have to have your tefillah mevurar, you have to have your tefillah very exact and precise before God. From this perspective, he basically says derech tefillah ubakasha is 100% fine in Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, and the list goes on. The Ben Ish Chai says the same thing about Kiddush Levana, the fact that we say tipol aleim imata b'vachad b'gdoza ra'achai yitmu ka'aven, and we don't finish the pasuk. Derech tchina uvakasha v'lachen lo kabdinan. The Kaf HaChaim says Friday night when you say Yom HaShishi, and you don't say the whole pasuk from the beginning. Katam katav petach tvir b'derech kriyat psukim asur lechalek pasuk l'shnayim ava b'derech tefillah mutar. If you're saying it for the sake of psukim, no. But if you're saying it for the sake of davening, then it's okay. The Maharsham in a tshuva says the same thing. Derech tefillah sharei hachanami derech shevach. Anytime you want to use it to invoke either a prayer or a praise, it's fine. But if you say it as psukim, that's where your problems begin. To give another example, the Aruch HaShulchan says, Shabbos morning, people say, Al Kain Beirach, they don't finish the pasuk. Says the Magen, says the Aruch HaShulchan, then kamatolah pasuk, you're not there in order to say psukim. There's no obligation Shabbos morning to say psukim. You can say Bori Priya Gafen and that's it. But if you want to say psukim, he says, lahagdim dvarim. You just want to start with, hey, I want to give an introduction to what we're doing. Again, you're not doing it for the sake of psukim, you're doing it for the sake of hagdamat dvarim, an introduction. Indeed, the Maharam Shik, Talmud of the Chasam Sofer, says, if you're saying it because there's an obligation to say psukim, then you got yourself a problem. But if you're just saying it because you want to get people into the mood, then it's okay. And he brings an interesting raya from Yoredeya regarding writing a Sefer Torah. You have to write a Sefer Torah, you have to put lines in the Sefer Torah and write on top of the lines. You don't see the lines because they're sort of with a knife very carefully in the Sefer Torah, and that's called sirtut. So he basically says that if you're writing, then if you're writing a Sefer Torah, then you have to write it that way. But if you're writing it derech tzachot, you're writing it on a piece of paper to someone, you're invoking a pasuk in honor of writing to someone in the middle of a letter, then of course there's no obligation to do it. And he says the same thing here. There's an obligation to finish a pasuk when you're saying it for psukim, but there's no obligation if you're just saying it for the sake of, I want to enhance what I have to say. In his words, you basically come home and you say, hey guys, it's Shabbos today, and I'm going to prove it to you. And indeed, he says on Motzei Shabbos, many Jews say the Tehillim of David Baruch Hashem Tzuri, and they say the words Yivarecha Hashem Etzion or Seshamayim Va'aretz, and they don't complete the pasuk. Same idea. It's just a nice way to end the week, to basically say the beginning of the week. So I think that is one of the most compelling answers that we have. In other words, all the examples we brought from the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim are basically part of davening in some way or another. We're invoking a pasuk to enhance our prayer service. If that is the case, then there's no problem. But if you're saying it for the sake of a pasuk, say Kriyat Shema or laning, of course, then you have to finish the pasuk. That, I believe, answers all questions from the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, and I think is the most compelling answer that we have. So to sum up, we brought today 3 different answers as to why it's okay to say half a pasuk. Number 1, if 2 people are saying it, they're eventually going to finish the pasuk, it's okay. Number 2, it doesn't apply to the Ketuvim, which is many of our examples, but that is a point of controversy. The Tosfos seems to imply that it does, as the Nishmat Adam was medayek, but the Magen Avram says no. And number 3, the most compelling answer is if it's done in prayer and not as psukim, namely, it's not a recitation of verses from the Torah as an obligation, but rather it's an obligation of davening or praise, and you're just invoking psukim in order to enhance it, then it's 100%. Hashem Elokai bechol levu v'yifrach habedushim mechu leyom v'yom Poi kamal goyim asher osisu yovu v'yiveyesh tachavi lefunei Hashem